Hey friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 7 of our read along together of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Today we're going to start Stave 4, talking about the ghost or the spirit of Christmas future. Ooh. Um, sorry, it just sounds so exciting when you get to the ghost of Christmas future. I thought we'd start out by having some tea though. Whoops, I forgot to pull out the loose tea leaves because I have it in a, whoops, I usually try to pull out the strainer that has the tea leaves in it so that they don't keep steeping in there and getting it all bitter. But yeah, so today's tea that I'm enjoying is a Dorian Gray is what it's called. And I will read you the ingredients in just a moment once I get this poured out. I realized I haven't had a good Grey or Earl Grey tea in a while since my big canister of it ran out, and I'd meant to go buy some more and I just hadn't done it yet. So I'm still going through my little samples. This one is a Dorian Gray tea from Point Loma Teas, and the description of it is black tea, essential fruity note of bergamot, apple, cornflowers, linden, and mallow petals. I've had it before. It's very good. Hi, Judy. I don't know that it particularly makes me feel like I'm aging horribly and hideously on the inside, but maybe looking not so bad on the outside. But I will say this tea looks beautiful and it smells great too, and it tastes even better. So maybe it's, well, let's hope it doesn't mean it's rotten to the core, that it's a Dorian Gray. Delicious though. All right, so let's see. Um, I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about, yes, or the reading that we did last Thursday. I thought that it was actually one of the better staves in the, or one of the better sections in the sense of getting something different than what we see normally in the stage or film adaptations of the story. That we're actually getting something more than what we would normally get in those adaptations. And it was something that I didn't expect. Again, not having read the book either ever or in a long time, still not even sure. But basing most of my memory of the story on the adaptations I've seen, there were several bits in the reading that we did on Thursday that felt new and fresh to me. And so let's talk a bit about those. Stave 3 was entitled The Second of the Three Spirits, and it focused on the ghost of Christmas present. And in the first section of it, hello, in the first section of it that we read on Wednesday, we there was, like I said, a huge, very detailed description of like the abundance and the joyous celebration of Christmas in the sense of like all the different treats and foods and decorations and the smells and the tastes. Oh, so much about the tastes of Christmas. Speaking of which, I've been eating Christmas cookies like crazy, and they are delicious. Oh yeah, I did actually eat real meals of breakfast and lunch, but I have supplemented them with a lot of Christmas cookies. So yes, the smells and tastes of Christmas are delightful. And so the first section of that stave talked a lot about that. And then we met the Cratchit family, Bob Cratchit, of course, being the clerk of Ebenezer Scrooge. And that section ended then with Scrooge leaving the Cratchit family and going on his way. And what we discover afterwards, and this is one of the stuff that part of the sections that that was felt new to me, is that it doesn't only focus on the life of Ebenezer Scrooge and his own acquaintances. So during this section with this second spirit, the ghost of Christmas present, who again is this jolly, healthy, vibrant spirit. I mean, again, sort of looking like a young Father Christmas in a flowing robe, bare chested under the robe. I mean, just very vital and full of life, and joy, that this ghost takes him not just to visit the people that he knows and the markets, but also he takes him further afield. They go to miners, they see people working boats in the sea, they travel far and wide and see these various people in many different circumstances of life, be they rich, be they poor, be they whatever, each of them keeping the spirit, young and old, keeping the spirit of Christmas alive and singing a Christmas song or telling a story or just feeling some charity in their heart for everyone else. Hello, it's good to see so many of you guys coming in today. Thank you for being here. And so that I thought was a little different, because usually I only see the ghost of Christmas present usually they focus on the Cratchits and then also the section we're going to get to a little bit with the nephew. But this idea of the ghost taking Scrooge to see the wider world and to seeing how all these different people, no matter what your circumstances, you can choose to be charitable. You can choose to be kind. And again, that's, I think, what Dickens is getting at when he talks about what it is to celebrate Christmas. Yes, it's about the religious holiday, but I think even more so what Dickens is getting at in the story is it is your choice to be a citizen of the world. And that whole idea of your business is the business of humanity, and that we can each choose to be kind. And this is what happens in this section where the ghost of Christmas Present takes Scrooge to see all these different people all around in all these different circumstances. And yet, still, even in places that seem like he hears the moaning of the wind and thinks what a solemn thing it is to move over the lonely darkness into an abyss. And yet still, even there, they find the spirit of Christmas and kindness. Suddenly, the scene morphs, and Scrooge is in the presence of his nephew. And what he finds there is that at his nephew's home, the nephew's wife is there too, who I'm not sure if Scrooge has actually met her. He had implied rather maliciously to the nephew in the first stave that, part of the reason he's not visiting is because the nephew chooses to marry this woman, But here we see her with her and her family and her friends, and all these people are gathered. And the topic of the nephew's, Fred is the name of the nephew, by the way. Fred's uncle is mentioned, and how he says basically that his uncle is a comical fellow, not pleasant as he might be, but his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. So even though the uncle is rude to him, Fred sees that really Scrooge is suffering himself, that he is, by choosing to isolate himself, his punishment is his own isolation, and that in his own loneliness is the cage that he's making for himself, just like Jacob Marley made the chains that he then had to wear through the afterlife, that Scrooge is creating his own cage. And so, and he says, his wealth is no use to him. He doesn't do good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. And he doesn't have the satisfaction of thinking that he's ever going to benefit us with it. So again, he's just holding on to this money without doing any good with it. And therefore it is of no value. And so Scrooge's nephew says basically, I'm sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried, who suffers by his ill whims himself. Always. And here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. And what's the consequence? He doesn't get to enjoy dinner and company. And so the rest of the evening, we see a really detailed description of them having fun together, them playing songs, them playing games, them making jokes. There's even a little pantomime, like think of charades, where they're doing or actually it seems more like a 20 questions kind of thing, where they realize that the thing that Fred was acting out, like the monster was not a bear, was actually Uncle Scrooge. And so everybody seems to know about Uncle Scrooge, and yet they are, none of them are mean-spirited about it. The wife is a little resentful, but Fred's wife, but they do realize that Scrooge is only hurting himself, and ultimately he is to be pitied for that. And Scrooge, as he's watching them play their games, he finds himself playing too. He's having a good time, and it's the implication is that if Scrooge had been there, maybe he would have enjoyed himself. It was a long night, and shortly after this, they do go on to another scene. The ghost takes Scrooge on to other places. They go by sick beds, they go to foreign lands, they go to all different places, almshouses, hospitals, jails. Wherever they go, the Christmas spirit brings a bit of joy and lightens the sorrow that they see around them. And gradually too, and this is interesting, Scrooge points out, and I can't remember if I've ever seen this depicted in any of the adaptations. If anyone has, please mention it. The ghost gradually grows older over the course of their evening together. And it says Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they left the children's 12th night party. When looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that his hair was great. And Scrooge asks, are spirits' lives so short? And the ghost says, my life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight. And he had mentioned earlier that he had brothers who would come and see other Christmases. And so again, it's that idea that the ghost of Christmas Present has only the present before him. He has only this one Christmas to celebrate and to bring joy to the world, and then he's gone for someone else. Another time, another present to come in. Before their time together ends, though, Scrooge looks down and he sees something by the robes of the now elderly and shrunken spirit of Christmas present. And he looks down and he sees that there are two children hiding under the robes of this spirit. And the two children are, it says, where graceful youth should have filled their features out, instead they had been touched by a stale and shriveled hand like that of aged, had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Devils lurked and glared out menacing, and what the ghost says is that the two children he sees, the boy and the girl, are not of the spirit world. They belong to man, and they cling to me, he says, appealing from their fathers. The boy is ignorance, and the girl is want. Beware of them both in all of their degree, but most of all beware the boy, ignorance, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. And so we see that when we allow ignorance to be unchecked and to be, to not do anything to help it and stop it, then it ultimately leads to doom. And we leave people wanting. We leave sorrow in the world. So Scrooge then says, have they no refuge or resource? And the spirit, again, as their time draws to a close, repeats the words that Scrooge had uttered in the first stave when he was talking to the two gentlemen asking for a charitable donation. And in response to this question about how to give succor, how to help ignorance and want, the spirit replies, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? And so again, this idea that mercy should be something that we can all do, and we can all make this world better by keeping it with us and living it. The bell then strikes 12, and Scrooge looks about him for the ghost, does not see it, and as the last stroke stops vibrating, he remembers the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. Such a good chapter. I've really enjoyed how that had so many nuances that only seeing the film adaptations or the stage adaptations I had not realized were there. All right, so now let's go in and read stave 4. This is going to be the last of the longer staves. So once again, I'm going to break it in half. We're going to stop about halfway through today. We'll complete this last stave tomorrow, and then on Wednesday we'll actually complete this story. So yay! All right, so let's go ahead and start stave 4. It is entitled The Last of the Spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us, Scrooge pursued. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as if observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge, "lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." The phantom moved away as if it had come toward him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress. The phantom moved away as it had come toward him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on 'change, among the merchants, who hurried up and down, and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had often seen them. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin, "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff-box. "I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first, with a yawn. "What has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey-cock. "I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker, "for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer?" "I don't mind going if a lunch is provided," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose, "but I must be fed, if I make one." Another laugh. "Well, I am the most disinterested among you, after all," said the first speaker, "for I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go, if anybody else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye." Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men, and looked toward the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into a street. Its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy, and of great importance. He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first, "Old Scratch has got his own at last, eh?" "So I am told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it?" "Seasonable for Christmas time. You are not a skater, I suppose?" No, something else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost province was the future. nor could he think of any one immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them. But nothing doubting that, to whomsoever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement, he resolved to treasure up every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared, for he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the phantom, with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied, from the turn of his hand and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their fences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed beetling shop, below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were brought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a gray-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frowsing curtain of miscellaneous tatters, hung upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh. "Let the charwoman alone to be the first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlor. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, how it squeaks! There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe, and I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. Ha, ha! We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlor. Come into the parlor." The parlor was the space between the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. When he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor, and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That's true indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." Why then don't stand staring as if you was Why then don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman? Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. We should hope not. Very well, then, cried the woman. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, pursued the woman, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself. It's the truest word that ever was spoke, said Mrs. Dilber. It's a judgment on him. I wish it was a little heavier judgment, replied the woman, and it should have been, you may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We knew pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found that there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said Joe, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large, heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains! You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there? Said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching out, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman coolly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Whose else's do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things, if he did. Ah, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue with in horror, as they sat grouped about their spoil, in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. Ha, ha, laughed the same women. Excuse me. Ha ha! Laughed the same woman, when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Ha ha ha! A spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens! What is this? And on that cliffhanger, I'm going to stop. Oh, I feel a little cruel for doing that. I'm so sorry. All right, we're going to stop right there. So Scrooge has seen this horror of how this poor gentleman whom he doesn't know has passed away, and other people don't lament his passing. And in fact, several people take advantage of his passing by stealing items from the deceased in order to pawn them off and to make a little money. And in fact, they describe the person who has passed away, the unnamed person who has passed away, as somebody who has like scared off the people in life who would have been around him, leaving him alone to die and to be preyed upon by these scavengers. And Scrooge is saying that perhaps his own end could be something like that, this unhappy man. So, on that note, we will stop our reading for today. Tomorrow we will complete our reading of Stave number 4, which is entitled The Last of the Spirits, and we'll find out who was this just mysterious gentleman that has passed away and been left alone. Who could it be? We'll find out tomorrow. And thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you're having a great rest of your day. I'll see you then. I look forward to finishing this with you on Tuesday. See you, friends. Bye.